Everyone at the gala stopped breathing when Isabel threw the gift on the floor. She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah and laughed a cruel sound that echoed off the marble walls. "A dirty old diary," she shrieked, clutching Alexander's arm. "This is what you give the new CEO of Thorn Enterprises. God, Sarah, you really are pathetic." Alexander didn't defend his wife. He just looked away, ashamed. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply picked up the book, dusted it off, and whispered, "I see." Isabel thought she had won. She thought she had humiliated the wife to clear the way for herself. But she didn't know that the dirty diary contained a signature that was worth $4 billion and the power to destroy them both. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco didn't just sparkle. They seemed to judge you. At least that was how Sarah Thorne felt as she smoothed the fabric of her 3-year-old navy dress. It was sensible, modest, and completely invisible in a sea of red, silk, gold, sequins, and diamonds that cost more than Sarah's childhood home. Tonight was the night. Her husband, Alexander Thorne, was officially being named the CEO of Thorne & Cudum, the logistics empire his father had built, but which Alexander had modernized. Sarah stood near a pillar, clutching a small wrapped package. Her hands were trembling. She wasn't trembling because of the crowd. She was trembling because of the woman standing next to her husband. Isabel DuPont. Isabel was everything Sarah was not. Tall, statuesque, and wearing a custom-made emerald gown that clung to her body like a second skin. She was Alexander's VP of marketing. But everyone in the room, perhaps even the waiters, knew the truth. The way Isabel's hand lingered on Alexander's bicep. The way Alexander leaned down to whisper in her ear, ignoring the investors waiting to shake his hand. Sarah watched them from across the room. 10 years. She had been with Alexander for 10 years. She had worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his MBA when his father cut him off. She had clipped coupons so he could buy his first tailored suit. She had been his foundation. But now that the skyscraper was built, it seemed he no longer needed the foundation. "He looks happy, doesn't he?" a voice sneered. Sarah turned to see Mrs. Gable, the wife of a board member, holding a martini. Mrs. Gable's eyes darted to the package in Sarah's hands. "Is that your gift, dear? It looks quaint." "It's meaningful," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the turmoil in her gut. "It's something he's wanted for a long time. Something from before." Mrs. Gable smirked and walked away, clearly uninterested in meaningful things. The music swelled, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage. Alexander took the microphone, his charisma radiating through the room. He spoke about innovation, about the future, about profits. He thanked the board. He thanked the investors. He even thanked Isabel for her tireless dedication to the brand. He did not mention Sarah. As the applause thundered, Isabel took the mic. And now, she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We have a tradition to uphold, gifts for the man of the hour. I believe his lovely wife Sarah is here somewhere. Sarah, darling, come up." It was a trap. Sarah knew it. Isabel never invited her to anything unless it was to highlight the contrast between them. The glamorous executive versus the dowdy housewife. Sarah stepped out of the shadows. The walk to the stage felt like walking to the gallows. The crowd parted their eyes, boring into her. She could hear the whispers. "That's the wife. She looks like a librarian. Does she know about Isabel?" Sarah climbed the stairs. Alexander looked at her, his expression tight. There was no love in his eyes, only annoyance. "Sarah," he muttered off mic, "you didn't have to bring a gift up here. You could have left it at the table." "Isabel called me up," Sarah replied softly. Isabel stepped forward, beaming. "Oh, nonsense, Alex. We all want to see what the woman who knows you best got you for your big night." She snatched the package from Sarah's hands before Sarah could offer it. The wrapping paper was simple brown craft paper tied with a piece of twine. Compared to the piles of Gucci and Rolex boxes on the side table, it looked like garbage. "Eco-friendly," Isabel joked into the microphone. The crowd chuckled. Isabel tore the paper open. She paused. She reached into the paper and pulled out the object. It was a small, leather-bound book. The leather was cracked and peeling. The pages were yellowed. It smelled faintly of mildew and old tobacco. It looked like something you would find in a donation bin at a Goodwill. Silence fell over the ballroom. Isabel stared at it, then looked at Sarah. Then she did the worst thing possible. She laughed. It wasn't a polite giggle. It was a full-throated, incredulous laugh that invited everyone else to join in. "A diary," Isabel announced, holding the rotting book up by one corner as if it were contaminated. "Sarah, honey, did you raid an attic, or did you dig this out of the trash on your way in?" A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. "It's not a diary," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise. "It's a first edition field journal from 1922. It belonged to—" "Oh, spare us the history lesson," Isabel interrupted, tossing the book onto the table of expensive gifts. It landed with a dull thud next to a set of platinum car keys. "Alex just closed $100 million merger, Sarah. He needs things that fit his future, not dusty junk from the past." Isabel turned to Alexander, placing a hand on his chest. "I, on the other hand, got you something real." She snapped her fingers. A waiter brought out a sleek black box. Inside was a Patek Philippe watch encrusted with diamonds. "To match your new status, baby." Alexander took the watch, his eyes lighting up. He looked at the diamond watch, then at the old leather book, and finally at Sarah. This was the moment. The moment he could defend her. The moment he could tell everyone that the book was what he had cried about losing years ago, his grandfather's lost journal, the one thing that connected him to the man who started the company. Sarah had spent 3 years tracking it down through private collectors in Europe. She had sold her grandmother's ring to buy it. Alexander looked at Sarah. "Sarah," he sighed into the microphone. "I appreciate the thought, but Isabel is right. We're moving forward. Maybe we can keep this in the garage." The crowd roared with laughter. Something inside Sarah snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a bridge collapsing after holding too much weight for too long. She looked at Alexander. Really looked at him. She saw the weak chin his beard hid. She saw the greed in his eyes. She saw a stranger. "The garage," Sarah repeated. "Don't be dramatic," Alexander hissed, covering the mic. "Go sit down. You're embarrassing me." "Yes," Isabel chimed in, leaning close to Sarah. Her voice a whisper only they could hear. "Go back to the suburbs, Sarah. Let the adults handle the business. Honestly, looking at you makes me sad. You're like a stain on his Italian suit." Sarah looked at Isabel. For the first time in years, Sarah stood up straight. Her posture shifted. The meekness evaporated, replaced by a cold, aristocratic rigidity that neither Alexander nor Isabel had ever seen. You think that book is trash, Sarah said clearly into the microphone. She stepped closer, grabbing the mic stand so firmly her knuckles turned white. It looks like trash, Isabel scoffed. That book, Sarah said, her voice ringing out with a sudden commanding authority, contains the original logistics routes mapped by Alexander's grandfather. But more importantly, on the last page, it contains the bearer bonds and the controlling shares of Vanguard Holdings. The room went quiet. Vanguard Holdings was the parent company of Thorn and Kotum. It was the entity that actually owned the building they were standing in. Alexander frowned. What are you talking about? Vanguard is owned by a shell corporation in the Caymans. Nobody knows who runs it. I know who runs it, Sarah said. She walked over to the table and picked up the trash book. She opened it carefully to the back cover. There, tucked into a hidden leather pocket, was a document stamped with wax seals. She pulled it out. Because I am Vanguard Holdings, Sarah declared. Isabel laughed again, but this time it sounded nervous. You're a housewife. You clip coupons. You drive a Honda. I clip coupons because I hate waste, Sarah said, her eyes locking onto Isabel's. And I drive a Honda because I don't feel the need to wear my bank account on my wrist. Sarah turned to the crowd. My maiden name is not Bennett. That was my mother's name to protect me from people like you. She gestured to Isabel. My father was Harrison Sterling. A gasp, loud and sharp, went through the room. Harrison Sterling was a legend, an oil and shipping magnate who had died mysteriously 20 years ago, leaving his fortune to a lost daughter no one could find. Liar, Alexander whispered, his face draining of color. You told me your dad was a mechanic. He was, Sarah said. He liked to fix classic cars in his spare time. He also owned half the Pacific seaboard. Sarah looked down at the document in her hand. I bought the majority stake in Thorn and Comney this morning. I wanted to give you this journal as a sign that I was ready to invest fully in you, Alexander, to finally merge my family's resources with yours. I was going to sign this over to you tonight, as a birthday gift. She held up the document. It was a transfer of ownership. I was going to make you the owner of the largest shipping conglomerate in the world. Alexander reached out his hands, shaking violently. Sarah. Baby. Wait. Sarah ripped the document in half. The sound of the tearing paper was louder than the music had been. But, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm, I see now that you prefer the watch and the mistress. She dropped the torn pieces of paper onto the floor at Isabel's feet. Happy birthday, Alexander. You're fired. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a tsunami. Alexander stood frozen, his hand half extended toward the torn paper. Isabel looked down at the scraps, her brain trying to process the mathematics of what just happened. Harrison Sterling. Billions. Controlling interest. You can't fire him, Isabel shrieked, her voice cracking. This is his company. His father built it. Sarah turned, her dress swirling around her ankles. His father built a trucking company. My capital turned it into a global logistics firm. Check the board of directors, Isabel. Who is the chairman? The chairman is S.H. Trust. Alexander stammered. Sarah Harrison Trust, Sarah clarified. She looked at the crowd of stunned investors. I apologize for the disruption. The open bar will remain open for another hour. However, the new administration of Thorn and Copy will be conducting a full audit of the marketing department starting tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. She looked directly at Isabel. I suggest you update your resume. Although given the embezzlement investigation I'm about to launch regarding the promotional budget, you might need a lawyer more than a resume." Isabel's face went from red to ghostly white. Sarah walked off the stage. The crowd, the same crowd that had mocked her 5 minutes ago, parted like the Red Sea. People bowed their heads. Some looked terrified. "Sarah, Sarah, please!" Alexander scrambled down the stairs, tripping over his own feet. He grabbed her arm. Sarah stopped and looked at his hand on her arm. "Let go. We can talk about this," Alexander pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was a joke. The laughing. It was just stress. You know I love you. Isabel means nothing to me. She's just an employee." Behind them on stage, Isabel gasped. "Excuse me. She means nothing," Alexander yelled back at Isabel, desperate to save his sinking ship. "Sarah is my wife." Sarah laughed. It was a soft, dry sound. "You chose the diamond watch, Alex. You chose the glitter. Now you have to live with it." She pulled her arm free. "I'm freezing the joint accounts in 10 minutes. I suggest you transfer enough for a cab ride home." Sarah walked out of the ballroom doors, leaving the golden light behind her. She stepped into the cool San Francisco night, where a black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb. A uniformed driver opened the door. "To the airport, Miss Sterling," the driver asked. "Yes, James," Sarah said, sliding into the leather interior. "Take me to the private hangar. I'm done with this city." Back inside, the chaos was just beginning. The hangover from the gala wasn't physical. It was existential. Alexander sat on the edge of the king-sized bed in the presidential suite of the Fairmont. It was 3:00 a.m. He was still wearing his tuxedo pants and the white dress shirt, now unbuttoned and stained with sweat. The Patek Philippe watch, the symbol of his triumph, sat on the nightstand. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, the diamonds didn't sparkle. They looked cold, like jagged ice. Isabel was in the bathroom. She had been in there for an hour, frantically making phone calls. Through the heavy oak door, Alexander could hear her muffled screaming. "What do you mean? The company card is declined. It's a black card. Run it again." Silence. Then the sound of something porcelain shattering against the wall. Alexander put his head in his hands. His mind was replaying the loop of the last 4 hours. The tearing of the paper. The name, Harrison Sterling. The look in Sarah's eyes, not of anger, but of absolute, crushing indifference. The bathroom door flew open. Isabel stormed out. She had scrubbed her makeup off, leaving her face raw and pale. Without the contouring and the false lashes, she looked younger, but also harder. Desperate. "They cut us off," she hissed, throwing her phone onto the duvet. "I tried to order room service. A bottle of water, Alex. Just water. The card was declined. I tried my personal card. Declined. I tried your personal card that you gave me for emergencies. Declined." Alexander looked up slowly. She said she was freezing the assets. "She can't do that," Isabel shrieked, pacing the room like a caged tiger. Her emerald dress was crumpled in a pile on the floor. She was wearing a hotel bathrobe that suddenly looked too big for her. "It's your company. You're the CEO. You can't just fire the CEO and freeze his bank accounts in the middle of the night because of a bad breakup." "It wasn't a breakup, Isabel," Alexander said, his voice hollow. "It was a hostile takeover, and it wasn't my company. I see that now." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. The fog was rolling in, swallowing the Transamerica Pyramid. "My father," Alexander started, his voice trembling. My father always told me that we had a silent partner who injected capital when the business was failing in the 90s. He said the partner wanted anonymity. I thought it was the cartel, or maybe some government black ops fund. I never asked. He turned to look at Isabel. It was Sarah. She's been funding us since before we were married. When I was in grad school, when I failed that first startup, the money that miraculously appeared. It was her. So she played you, Isabel spat. She lied to you for 10 years. That makes her a psychopath. Alex, you're the victim here, am I? Alexander laughed bitterly. I cheated on the woman who secretly built my throne. And I did it with the woman who just broke a soap dish because she couldn't order a $12 water. Isabel narrowed her eyes. Careful, Alex. You need me right now. I'm the only one in your corner. Are you? Alexander walked over to the nightstand and picked up the watch. He weighed it in his hand. Or are you just worried about the audit? Isabel froze. The color drained from her face entirely. What do you know? She whispered. I know the marketing budget has been overblown by 200% for the last 3 quarters, Alexander said softly. I signed off on it because I was sleeping with the VP of marketing. I thought you were spending it on influencers and billboards. But if Sarah's auditors look closely, what are they going to find, Isabel? Isabel didn't answer. She turned away, biting her thumbnail. The morning sun rose grey and unforgiving. At 7:30 a.m. they tried to leave the hotel. The front desk manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had greeted Alexander by name for 5 years, did not smile. Mr. Thorne, Henderson said, his face impassive. Your credit on file has been suspended. The bill for the suite, the gala usage, and the damages to the bathroom comes to $42,000. Alexander patted his pockets. Mr. Henderson, there's been a banking error. Put it on the corporate tab. The corporate account has flagged your authorization as terminated, Henderson said. He signaled to 2 large security guards standing near the potted palms. We will need a valid form of payment, or we will have to involve the authorities. Isabel stepped behind Alexander, using him as a shield. Here, Alexander said, his hands shaking as he unclasped the Patek Philippe watch. He slammed it onto the marble counter. It's worth $80,000. Take it. Keep the change. He grabbed Isabel's arm and dragged her out the revolving doors before Henderson could protest. They stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping their faces. No chauffeur, no Rolls-Royce. Uber? Isabel asked weakly. Apps linked to the card, Alexander muttered. We walk. They walked 6 blocks to the Thorne and Cobain headquarters. It was a humiliating procession. The CEO in a stained tuxedo and the VP in a hotel bathrobe and heels, shivering as commuters stared at them. When they reached the glass skyscraper, the lobby was chaos. There were men in dark suits everywhere. They were carrying boxes. Not boxes into the building, but boxes out of it. Alexander pushed through the revolving door. He saw his executive assistant Jessica crying near the reception desk. She was holding a cardboard box containing a stapler and a potted plant. Jessica, Alexander called out. What's happening? Jessica looked up. Her eyes were red. She looked at Alexander with a mixture of pity and disgust. They fired us, Mr. Thorne. The whole executive floor. Everyone appointed by you in the last 2 years. Who? Alexander demanded. Who is doing this? I am, a deep voice boomed. A man stepped out of the elevator bank. He was older with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Alexander's car. He walked with a cane, but he didn't look frail. He looked like a weapon. Marcus Vane, Alexander breathed. Marcus Vane was a legend in corporate law. He was known as the guillotine. He didn't just win cases. He dismantled the opposition so thoroughly they couldn't find work at a fast food chain afterwards. "Mr. Thorne," Vane said smoothly, stopping 3 feet away. "And Miss DuPont. How convenient of you to arrive. It saves us the cost of serving you the papers at your residence." 2 junior associates stepped forward and shoved thick envelopes into Alexander and Isabel's chests. "What is this?" Isabel cried. "Notice of termination for cause," Vane recited, sounding bored. "Gross misconduct, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and conducting personal affairs on company time. We have the logs, Miss DuPont, the business trips to Cabo, the client dinners that were just you and Mr. Thorne at Michelin star restaurants. It's all itemized." "You can't prove anything," Isabel yelled. "We have the emails," Vane smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Mrs. Thorne, excuse me. Ms. Sterling has had a forensic IT team mirroring your servers for 6 months. She has every email, every text, every deleted draft." Alexander felt the room spin. 6 months. She's known. For 6 months, she wanted to give you a chance, Vane said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She waited. She hoped you would end the affair. She hoped you would remember who stood by you when you were nothing. But last night, when you let that woman laugh at her family legacy. Vane leaned in closer. "That was the nail in your coffin, son." Vane tapped his cane on the floor. "Security." 4 guards approached. "Escort these trespassers off the premises. If they return, arrest them." "My laptop," Alexander protested, as a guard grabbed his arm. "My contacts. Property of Vanguard Holdings," Vane said, turning his back. "Goodbye, Mr. Thorne." Thrown out onto the pavement for the 2nd time that morning, Alexander looked up at the building that bore his name. He watched as a workman on a ladder began to peel the vinyl letters of Thorne off the glass facade. The descent from master of the universe to unemployed adulterer took less than 12 hours. Alexander and Isabel retreated to the only place they had left. The penthouse apartment Alexander and Sarah had shared for the last 5 years. The ride up in the elevator was silent. The tension was so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the shaft. Isabel was scrolling through her phone, which was now blowing up with notifications. "My Instagram," she whispered, horrified. "The comments. Someone leaked the video of the gala. They're calling me. Oh, God." "Stop reading it," Alexander snapped. "They're calling me a dollar store gold digger," Isabel cried. "And they're calling you the idiot who sold the moon for a lamp post." The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. Alexander stepped out, expecting the comfort of home. The beige sofas, the Art Deco lamps, the smell of Sarah's vanilla candles. Instead, he stepped into a void. The apartment was gutted. The furniture was gone. The paintings were gone. The rugs were gone. The curtains had been pulled down. The vast living room was nothing but an expanse of cold hardwood floor. "What the hell?" Isabel's voice echoed in the empty space. Alexander ran to the bedroom. Empty. The closet where his suits usually hung in color-coordinated rows was bare. Even the hangers were gone. He ran to the kitchen. The fridge was open and empty. The cabinets were stripped. On the marble island, the only thing remaining in the entire 4,000-square-foot apartment, sat a single, small object. It was a coupon. Alexander picked it up. It was a buy one, get one free coupon for a frozen pizza brand that Sarah used to buy when they were poor. She had clipped it from a circular. Next to the coupon was a post-it note in Sarah's neat, cursive handwriting. Since you like things that look cheap but cost a lot, you can have the apartment. The rent is $15,000 a month. Lease is in your name. Good luck. S. She took everything, Alexander whispered. She even took the toaster. She can't do this, Isabel screamed, her voice bouncing off the empty walls. This is community property. The furniture was hers, Alexander said, staring at the coupon. She brought it from her grandmother's estate. The art, she bought it with her savings. It's all hers. Isabel slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. We have nothing, Alex. I have $200 in cash in my purse. My accounts are frozen pending the investigation. You have a watch you gave away to a hotel manager. How are we going to eat? How are we going to pay the rent? Alexander ignored her. He felt a sudden, desperate need to see Sarah, not to yell at her, not to beg for money, but to see her face. He needed to understand who he had actually been married to. The meek woman who made him tuna sandwiches was gone. In her place was a titan. And strangely, terrifyingly, Alexander realized he found this new, ruthless Sarah incredibly compelling. He needed to find her. Stay here, Alexander said, grabbing his car keys from the counter, then remembering his company car was likely being towed right now. Damn it. Where are you going? Isabel demanded. I'm going to find my wife. She's not your wife anymore, Isabel yelled after him. She's your executioner. Alexander ran down the fire escape stairs. 40 flights. By the time he reached the street, his legs were jelly. He hailed a taxi, praying he had enough loose cash in his pocket to cover it. Where to? The driver asked. Alexander paused. Where would she go? She wouldn't go to her parents' old house. That was a lie. Harrison Sterling's daughter wouldn't live in a shack. He remembered something. Years ago, Sarah had mentioned a little getaway spot she liked to drive to when he was busy working late, or as he now knew when he was with Isabel. She said it was near the cliffs in Big Sur. She called it the Aviary. Big Sur, Alexander said. Drive. That's a 3-hour ride, buddy. Gonna cost you $300 minimum. Alexander pulled out his wallet. He had $400 in emergency cash. He handed $300 to the driver. Just drive. The drive was agonizing. Alexander stared out the window as the city gave way to the winding coastal roads. He tried to call Sarah's phone. It went straight to voicemail. The subscriber you are trying to reach has upgraded to a private network. 3 hours later, the taxi dropped him off at the coordinates Alexander had found on an old shared location app he hadn't checked in years. He stood before a massive iron gate. Behind it, a long driveway wound up a cliffside, disappearing into the mist. This wasn't a little getaway spot. It was a fortress. Alexander walked up to the intercom. He pressed the buzzer. State your business, a voice crackled. It wasn't Sarah. It was a security guard. It's Alexander. Alexander Thorne. I need to speak to Sarah. Silence. Mrs. Sterling is not accepting visitors, the voice said. Mrs. Sterling? The name stung. She had already dropped his name. Tell her I know about the baby. It was a lie, a desperate Hail Mary lie. They had never talked about kids seriously. He was always too busy. But he hoped it would shock her enough to open the gate. The intercom clicked. A long pause. Then the heavy iron gates began to groan. They swung open slowly. Alexander's heart hammered in his chest. He began the long walk up the driveway. The air smelled of salt and pine. As he rounded the final bend, the house came into view. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on the edge of the world, overlooking the crashing Pacific Ocean. It looked like something out of a movie, and there, standing on the expansive deck, wrapped in a white cashmere shawl, holding a glass of dark red wine, was Sarah. She didn't look like the librarian anymore. The wind whipped her hair back. She looked like a queen in her castle watching a peasant approach the moat. Alexander reached the bottom of the deck stairs. He was out of breath, sweaty, and still wearing his ruined tuxedo pants. He looked up at her. "Sarah," he gasped. She looked down at him, taking a slow sip of wine. "You walked up the hill," she observed. "You used to complain about walking from the car to the restaurant." "I lied," Alexander said, his chest heaving. "About the baby. I needed you to see me." "I see you, Alexander," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was bored. "I see a man who had everything and threw it away for a cheap thrill." "It wasn't a thrill," Alexander pleaded, climbing the first step. "I was insecure. You were always so perfect, so patient. It made me feel small. Isabel made me feel big." "And now," Sarah asked, "do you feel big now standing in my driveway, homeless and jobless?" "I feel like a fool," Alexander admitted, tears pricking his eyes. "Sarah, I don't care about the money. I don't. I just want you back. I want us back." Sarah swirled the wine in her glass. She looked at him with a pity that was worse than hatred. "You don't want me, Alex. You want the safety I provided. You want the silent partner back." She set the glass down on the railing. "But here is the twist, Alexander. You said you lied about the baby to get into the gate." Alexander nodded. Sarah placed a hand on her stomach. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Well," she whispered, the wind carrying her voice down to him. "Ironically, that was the only thing you've been right about all day." Alexander's jaw dropped. The world stopped spinning. "You're 8 weeks," Sarah said. "I found out the day before the gala. I was going to tell you on stage, after I gave you the journal. We were going to start a family, Alex, a real dynasty." She turned her back on him. "But now my lawyers will be in touch regarding custody. Don't worry. We'll make sure the child knows who their father was. We'll show them pictures." "Sarah." "No." Alexander lunged up the stairs. 2 large men in black tactical gear stepped out from the glass doors, blocking his path. They didn't look like hotel security. They looked like mercenaries. "Escort Mr. Thorne to the main road," Sarah ordered without looking back. "And if he resists, well, we have good insurance." As the guards grabbed Alexander by the arms and dragged him backward, he screamed her name. He screamed until his voice gave out. But Sarah Sterling never turned around. She simply walked into her glass house and closed the door, shutting him out of paradise forever. Back in the city in the empty penthouse, Isabel's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered it, trembling. "Hello." "Isabel DuPont," a distorted voice asked. "Yes." "You have something Sarah Sterling wants, and if you give it to us, you might stay out of prison." Isabel's eyes widened. She looked around the empty apartment. "I have nothing." "She took everything." "You have the passwords," the voice said. "To Alexander's offshore crypto accounts, the ones he tried to hide from the audit." Isabel paused. She looked at the door Alexander had run out of. She thought about him leaving her there with nothing. "If I give them to you," Isabel whispered, "do I get a deal? You get a plane ticket to non-extradition country," the voice promised, "and a fresh start." Isabel smiled. It was a broken, jagged smile. "Get a pen," she said. "I'm ready to talk." The penthouse was no longer a home. It was a crime scene of a life that had imploded. Isabel DuPont sat on the floor of the empty living room, the hardwood cold against her legs. The only light came from the city glow outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same city she used to think she owned. Now San Francisco looked like a monster waiting to swallow her whole. She held the phone to her ear, her hand trembling so violently that the device kept tapping against her diamond earring, one of the few things she had managed to hide in her bra before the security guards escorted her out of the office. "I'm listening," Isabel whispered into the phone. "Smart girl," the distorted voice on the other end replied. It was a voice devoid of empathy, mechanical and precise. "Here is the situation, Ms. DuPont. The forensic accounting team has found the discrepancies in the marketing budget. $2 million siphoned into a shell company called Blue Horizon Consulting." Isabel squeezed her eyes shut. Blue Horizon. That was Alexander's idea. He swore it was untraceable. He swore it was their escape fund for when he eventually left Sarah. "I didn't sign those checks," Isabel stammered, her survival instinct kicking into overdrive. "Alexander did. He was the CEO. I just submessigned the invoices." "And that makes you an accessory to corporate fraud, grand larceny, and embezzlement," the voice droned. "Prison time for that is approximately 15 years. In a federal facility, no designer clothes, no skincare routine, just grey walls and bad food." A sob escaped Isabel's throat. The image was too vivid. She was a creature of comfort. Prison would kill her in a week. "But," the voice continued, "Mrs. Sterling is not interested in a small fish like you. She wants the architect. She wants Alexander." "What do I have to do?" Isabel asked, her voice hardening. The tears stopped. Panic was replaced by calculation. "Alexander has a private ledger, a digital key to the crypto accounts where the bulk of the stolen money is hidden. We know it exists, but we cannot access it without the seed phrase. He kept it offline, on paper." Isabel's eyes darted around the empty room. He doesn't trust clouds. He wrote it down." "Find it," the voice commanded. "You have 1 hour before the FBI arrives at the penthouse to execute a search warrant. If you hand us that ledger before they get there, you become a cooperating witness. You walk away. If the FBI finds it first, you go down with the ship." The line went dead. Isabel scrambled to her feet. She looked at the front door. Alexander was still gone, chasing after Sarah in Big Sur. She had an hour. She ran to the master bedroom. Where would he hide it? Alexander wasn't a genius, but he was paranoid. He wouldn't put it in a safe. Safes were the first place people looked. She tore open the vents. Nothing. She checked the hollow curtain rods. Nothing. Then she remembered the trash gift. The diary. Alexander had mocked Sarah for being sentimental, but Alexander himself had a strange attachment to his old college thing, a beaten-up copy of The Great Gatsby he kept on his bedside table. He claimed it was the only book he ever finished. She ran to where the nightstand used to be. The furniture was gone, but a small pile of junk Sarah's movers had left behind sat in the corner. Old receipts, a broken pen, and the book. Isabel grabbed the paperback. She fanned through the pages. Nothing. She threw it against the wall in frustration. The book hit the plaster, and the back cover split slightly. Isabel froze. She crawled over to the book. She peeled back the glued lining of the rear cover. There, written in microscopic handwriting on the cardboard backing, was a string of 12 random words. Giant. River. Signal. toast, velvet, anchor. The seed phrase? The keys to $4 million of stolen company money. Isabel stared at it. This was Alexander's life raft. If she gave this up, he would be destitute. He would go to prison for a very long time. He would have nothing. She thought about Alexander standing in the ballroom, letting the crowd laugh at Sarah. She thought about how easily he had turned on Sarah, a woman who had supported him for a decade. If he could do that to her, Isabel realized with a chilling clarity, he will do it to me, the moment it becomes convenient. She ripped the back cover off the book. The elevator chimed. Isabel spun around, clutching the cardboard to her chest. It wasn't the FBI. It was Alexander. He looked like a ghost. His tuxedo shirt was torn. His shoes were covered in mud from the hike up Sarah's driveway, and his eyes were red and swollen. He slumped against the doorframe, defeated. "She's pregnant." Alexander whispered the words, falling out of his mouth like stones. "She's having my baby, Isabel. And she had security throw me off a cliffside." He looked up at Isabel, expecting comfort, expecting an ally. "We have to figure this out. We have to lawyer up. I'll use the crypto money. It's enough to get us to Brazil. We can start over." He walked toward her, reaching out a hand. "We're in this together, right? You and me against the world." Isabel looked at his hand. It was dirty. She looked at the cardboard in her own hand. "I'm sorry, Alex," she said softly. "Sorry for what?" He frowned, confused. The elevator chimed again. This time it was followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots. "Police!" a voice shouted. "Federal agents, open up!" Alexander panicked. "The ledger, Isabel. Where is the book? I need the codes. We need to run." Isabel took a step back away from him. "Isabel!" Alexander's eyes went wide. "Give me the codes." "I can't," she said, her voice steady now. "I made a deal." Alexander stopped. The betrayal hit him harder than the physical exhaustion. You sold me out. You taught me well, didn't you?" Isabel replied coldly. "It's just business, Alex." The door burst open. 6 agents in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back swarmed the room. Guns were drawn. Alexander Thorne, hands in the air. As they shoved Alexander against the wall and cuffed his hands behind his back, he twisted his head to look at Isabel. She was standing calmly by the window, handing the piece of cardboard to a man in a suit who had walked in behind the agents. The man took the cardboard, checked it, and nodded to Isabel. "You're free to go, Ms. DuPont," the man said. Isabel picked up her purse. She walked past Alexander without making eye contact. "Isabel!" Alexander screamed, thrashing against the agents. "I left her for you. I ruined my life for you." Isabel paused at the elevator. She pressed the button. As the doors opened, she looked back one last time. "No, Alex," she said, pressing the button for the lobby. "You ruined your life because you're greedy. I was just the accessory." The doors closed, leaving Alexander alone with his consequences. 6 months later. The United States District Court for the Northern District of California was packed. It was the trial of the decade. The United States versus Alexander Thorne. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and anxiety. Reporters lined the back benches, their pens poised over notepads, hungry for the final chapter of the billionaire bachelor scandal. Alexander sat at the defense table. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair, once perfectly gelled, was thinning and grey at the temples. He wore an ill-fitting suit provided by his public defender, a harried woman named Ms. Klein, who had 20 other cases that week. There was no high-priced legal team. The assets had been frozen, seized, and returned to Thorn and Colum. Alexander couldn't even afford bail. He had spent the last 6 months in county jail, listening to the other inmates talk about the news. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrington entered a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose. She sat down and looked at the docket. "We are here for sentencing and final victim impact statements." Alexander swallowed hard. He refused to look at the gallery. He knew who was there. "The prosecution calls Sarah Sterling," the district attorney announced. A hush fell over the room. The heavy wooden doors opened. Sarah walked in. If Alexander looked like a ruin, Sarah looked like a monument. She wore a cream-colored maternity dress that draped elegantly over her heavy stomach. She was 8 months pregnant. She walked with a cane, not because she needed it, but because it gave her an air of regal authority. She didn't look at Alexander. She walked to the witness stand, swore on the Bible, and sat down. "Mrs. Sterling," the DA began, "can you tell the court how Mr. Thorne's actions affected the company?" "He nearly destroyed it," Sarah said, her voice clear and melodic. "He fired competent staff to hire sycophants. He diverted funds meant for safety inspections into his personal offshore accounts. He treated a legacy built by families as his personal piggy bank." "And on a personal level?" the DA asked softly. Sarah turned her head. For the first time in half a year, she looked at Alexander. Alexander flinched. He expected anger. He expected screaming. But Sarah's eyes were empty. It was the look one gives to a dead insect found on a windowsill. "He stole 10 years of my life," Sarah said. "He made me believe that love was about sacrifice, about making yourself small so someone else could feel big. He took my money, my trust, and my dignity. And when I tried to give him a gift, a journal that contained the history of his own family, he laughed." She paused, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "But I want to thank him," the courtroom murmured. Alexander looked up confused. "Thank him?" the DA asked. "Yes." Sarah continued. "If he hadn't been so arrogant, if he hadn't been so cruel that night at the gala, I might never have woken up. I might have stayed in the shadows forever. His betrayal forced me to step into the light. It forced me to take back my name, my company, and my future." She looked at the judge. "I don't ask for vengeance, Your Honor. I ask for justice. Not for me, but for the thousands of employees whose pensions he gambled with, and for this child who deserves to know that actions have consequences." Sarah stood up to leave the stand. "Wait," Alexander shouted, standing up. "Sarah, please, I'm the father. Doesn't that mean anything?" The judge banged her gavel. "Mr. Thorne, sit down." Sarah stopped. She turned slowly. "You are a sperm donor, Alexander," she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "A father is a man who protects his family. You protected nothing but your ego." She walked back to her seat in the front row, flanked by Marcus Vane. "The prosecution calls its final witness," the DA said. "Isabel DuPont." Alexander felt the blood leave his head. No, not her. She wouldn't. Isabel entered from a side door. She looked different, modest. She wore a grey cardigan and flat shoes. She wouldn't look at Alexander at all. She took the stand. "Ms. DuPont," the DA said, "you were the defendant's mistress and co-conspirator, correct?" "Yes," Isabel said quietly. And did Mr. Thorne explicitly tell you why he was moving money to the Blue Horizon accounts? Yes, Isabel said. She leaned into the microphone. He told me that Sarah was a boring anchor. He said he wanted to bleed the company dry before he divorced her, so that when the settlement came, there would be nothing left for her to take. He wanted to leave her with zero. A collective gasp went through the room. The jury looked at Alexander with pure disgust. "Liar!" Alexander screamed. "It was your idea. You wanted the yachts. You wanted the trips." "Order!" Judge Harrington yelled. Isabel looked at him then. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was steely. "I was greedy, Alex. I admit that. That's why I'm doing community service and probation. But you were malicious. You wanted to destroy her just because she was good, and you weren't." Isabel stepped down. The trial concluded swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledger Isabel provided, the testimony, the emails Sarah's team had recovered. Judge Harrington shuffled her papers. She looked over her glasses at Alexander. "Alexander Thorne, you have lived a life of supreme privilege. You were given a company you didn't earn, a wife you didn't deserve, and opportunities most people only dream of. And you responded with greed and malice." The judge took a breath. "On the count of grand larceny, guilty. On the count of securities fraud, guilty. On the count of embezzlement, guilty. I sentence you to 25 years in a federal correctional facility with no possibility of parole for the first 20. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. Two marshals grabbed Alexander's arms. "Sarah!" Alexander wailed as they dragged him away. "Sarah, look at me. I'm sorry, I love you." Sarah didn't turn around. She was busy looking at a document Marcus Vane had just handed her. It was the new organizational chart for Thorne and Konu, renaming it to Sterling Logistics. As Alexander was hauled through the side door, kicking and screaming. Sarah stood up. She smoothed her dress. Isabel was waiting by the exit. As Sarah passed, Isabel lowered her head. "Mrs. Sterling," Isabel whispered. I'm sorry." Sarah stopped. She looked at the woman who had helped destroy her marriage. "You were a tool, Isabel," Sarah said coolly. "A hammer used to break a wall. I don't hate the hammer. I just put it back in the toolbox." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a card. "But if you ever come near me or my child again," Sarah whispered, leaning in close, "I will make sure you never work in this hemisphere again. Do we understand each other?" "Yes," Isabel breathed. "Good." Sarah Sterling walked out of the courthouse doors and into the blinding sunlight. A crowd of photographers was waiting. Flashbulbs popped. "Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, what will you do now?" a reporter shouted. Sarah smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. She placed a hand on her belly. "Now," she said, "now I have a company to run, and a nursery to paint." She stepped into the waiting car, not a Rolls-Royce, but a sensible armored SUV. The door closed, shutting out the noise, leaving the drama behind, and moving forward into a future she finally owned completely. And that is the tragic fall of Alexander Thorne. He had a diamond in his hand, but he traded it for a glittery stone, only to realize too late that the diamond was the one holding up his entire world. It's a brutal reminder. Never underestimate the quiet ones, and never, ever judge a gift or a person by their wrapping paper. Sarah didn't just get revenge. She got justice. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have forgiven him, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next dramatic story. Thanks for watching.